Hey up and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are well deep into autumn. Depends if we know when we're recording, but well deep into autumn. It's getting cold and wet and dark in the UK. And imagine that for those in the southern hemisphere, you're thinking, get in, it's nearly summer. But thank you for joining us again. We are hugely privileged this afternoon, evening, morning, whatever time of day it is, to be joined by Hywel Roberts. Hywel has been on this circuit for, I'll let him tell you his story, and then. But we're going to talk about his new book, which we've got here, Botheredness, and we're going to have a little bit of deep dive into a deep dive. I had a bit of a twitch then when I heard the word. Sorry, I'll never say that again. But Hywel, thank you for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hey, Ben. Thanks very much for having me along. Honestly, I'm thrilled to be here. Well, I were a teacher for ages, and then I kept getting told I needed to do. They were wanting to give me a walkie-talkie. I was in secondary, and they wanted me to go chasing kids who were hiding behind bins a bit more and get me out of the classroom so I could do some leadership. But that meant just getting a high vis and a walkie-talkie. And no disrespect to anyone who has to do that in their day job, but it wasn't for me. I was very much classroom. I was what they used to call an AST, which was an advanced skills teacher. It just meant you got a little bit of financial enhancement, you got a bit more time, and you got invited to do some research into your own practice before research became a proper thing that teachers were doing. We were doing it, and I was learning lots of big words and talking about pedagogy and narrowing my eyes and nodding my head. And I found myself really loving finding out more about practice and about student motivation and so on, and adult motivation as well. And then I accidentally went freelance because I'd moved on from my job after doing a lot around curriculum and engagement in Barnsley in South Yorkshire, which I absolutely adored. But I didn't want to be a leader, and I wanted to sort of stay in classroom, but ironically that meant leaving. So what I do now, years later, I've just cracked on for over a decade now, working in class. I taught 4 days last week in class with kids, with teachers watching me, where I basically bring to life some of the stuff that I write about in the book, and so people can sort of see it in action. And I think teachers love ideas, but they love to be shown. I like to be shown. Don't just tell me about it. Don't just direct me to an academic paper. Show me, and then I'll be bothered. Do you know what I mean? So it's about that. It's about, getting down to nitty gritty. It's about what strategies have we got to get kids hooked in? How do you get a kid interested in rivers when they haven't got a bed at home? How do you do that? Well, you've got to have something you can do about it. And it's got to be more than a PowerPoint or a worksheet. Those things aren't bad, but you need a bit more. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I think I could crack on, now you've set me off. So I've got to tell myself to shut up.
No, it's absolutely fine. And it's a testament. It is littered through the books and the books that you've written in regards to that need and that want for educators that want to stay in the profession like yourself. And it's a shame that actually for a lot of people that you've had to leave the profession to get back into it and stay in the classroom. But teaching's a tough profession at the minute. And also those people that there's a lot of the difference between what I label people as rock stars and superstars, and maybe just if I explain that a little bit, that rock stars are potentially so superstars are the people that you come in and will maybe stay for a couple of years in the classroom, but have always been destined themselves and wanted to do something other than being in the classroom. They like it, but they want to maybe coach, mentor, be out of the classroom or lead and go up that ladder. Whereas I see rock stars as those rock bed, and it didn't just apply to education, but those teachers that are exceptional at what they do in terms of the classroom profession, but their rock bed is that they don't want to leave the teaching profession. They just want to be probably paid more, do more of that stuff, and actually education has become obsessed with, if you're any good, you should no longer be in the classroom and you should be doing something different to the thing that you loved in the first place. Is that your experience as well? How old do you think?
I feel like it is, and I feel like I mean it really resonates with me what you've said. I think what we've not been great at is nurturing practice. We've got really good the research. We've got really articulate, if you like, around elements of research. But I do think sometimes it's just the research that we've been presented with, right? We all need to be really interested in this, and you've got to be an expert at this, rather than seeing teaching as a big, holistic canon almost. Because something I've noticed even recently when I'm presenting at stuff or just having table discussions with teachers is that anything that's over 5 years old isn't kind of respected anymore. Or I mentioned Ken Robinson to a room full of teachers, and not people will write his name down, but no one will really know what impact he had on us. And he's from our manor. Do you know what I mean? And I'm talking to teachers in Yorkshire. People like I've been lucky enough to work with folk like Tim Brighouse and Mick Waters, and just if you like, folk who had a lot to tell us, and a lot to share with us, and were very generous. But they've kind of been sidelined, and I do think we need to look back sometimes in order to look ahead, if that makes sense. And I think that idea of just being at the pinnacle of success is to walk around corridors with a walkie-talkie for some. For a lot of teachers, they're really happy in the classroom and they're buzzing off the kids. And it's those people that we really need to look after, I think, and develop and be less. I mean, for me, I just want to develop imagination. I think professional imagination now should be privileged. We've and I know there's conversations around that. I'm talking about England now. In Wales, they're on it. In Wales with their curriculum, they're on it, aren't they? But in England, it feels like and other countries as well, it's still very much deliver this and you're doing your job. Just deliver that, you're doing your job. But I'm not sure that's what teaching is.
Totally agree, and you're talking about standing on the shoulders of giants like Sir Ken and Sir Tim, and we never got to meet Sir Ken, unfortunately, but we did meet Tim and Mick. They've spoken on our podcast. People like David Price, and we talked about Bob Harrison recently, and lots of others who have been that, who have championed and have stood in that space. And interestingly, as you're talking there, that we don't always. You meet teachers now that have never even heard of these people, or they think, that schools kill creativity TEDx talk from all them years ago. It's probably not relevant now. Like, it's more relevant now than it's ever been, because that delivery thing, and Bob Harrison talked to us about this multiple times, hasn't he, Steve, about delivery. We must have mentioned it about 10 times since he said it, about like, we deliver food. We don't deliver learning, and like, but you're right. We've got to a point where like the curriculum is prescribed, a trajectory of career progression is prescribed, what students' pace of learning. I was reading something in The End of Average by Todd Rose. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's an incredible book, and he talks about how Edmund Thorndike and Taylorism have kind of structured what we have in education right now, in terms of everybody has to work at a similar pace. Those who go faster are more clever, and those who go a little bit slower are less clever. In fact, we even call them slow learners. And the whole principle around it is that there is no correlation. The research tells there's no correlation between retention of understanding and the pace at which you learn it. So it's just like we've built a system on that. And interestingly, what you're talking about in the book that really resonates, and I think what happens in like your first book, obviously talk to us a little bit about that. I love that title about oops, that idea that we can learn things by accident, right? And we can teach things by accident, and kids pick things up by accident. Maybe talk to us about that before we get into this conversation about botheredness, if we can.
We had a problem at our school, and I was a secondary teacher who then went to behaviour setting, who then went to. I do a lot in primary. I work across the systems now, but the Oops book came about when I just got invited to write it, which was that was great. But I was just pulling in my work, everything I did was built around storytelling and drama, education drama, not drama for performance, not putting on a show, but actually just strategies and tools around educational drama. So it was all about finding narratives that the kids would buy into. And when I was writing it, Ofsted did a report about engaging boys, and they were talking about context, the importance of contextual learning. This was in about 2011. And it's, I couldn't imagine Ofsted doing that again. Use stories. I mean, Daniel Willingham was talking about it 20 years ago, but when I wrote Oops, I didn't know about that. I was just basically invited to write down what I knew about learning. And I wasn't academic. I'm not an academic. The only reason I did a master's was so I could hold my own. I could hold my own in a conversation where people were trying to bamboozle me. But the Oops book was very much about how do we protect children in, and how can a context help us? How can a story help us? How can we make it matter? And I mentioned botheredness in that book, in Oops. And I don't know if you've spoken to Paul Dix. He quoted it in his, he wrote a book called When the Adults Change, which is a great book. And he wrote about botheredness there. And I remember meeting him, and he just said, you just need to go back to that. And obviously that's where the botheredness book came from, really. But if you like, I was just in the fortunate position where someone just said, how do you get kids to care? Well, and my view was, well, sometimes you just have to not trick them, not mislead, but just actually say, let's say we're in charge of building a castle because let's say we're in charge of designing the tomb for the very poorly pharaoh. I'm just thinking of things I did last week. And placing kids in the position where they can use knowledge that has been perhaps delivered. They can use knowledge to then solve a problem or confront a dilemma, contribute.
Just a point on that, actually. Is the whole oops, botheredness and everything else, how do we get kids to care? Does that go back to the principle of educators should care about the subject that they're delivering, should be passionate about it, because ultimately, like dogs, they smell fear. And when you're delivering a subject that maybe you don't like, there's always a subject with even your context in your favourite subject that it's not your favourite bit. But how many people are delivering something now where actually that's not even your strongest bit, it's not even your passion, you're just teaching something and content rather than actually sharing your passion?
I love that. I think, thanks, Steve. I think for me, in secondary, you've got to be passionate about your subject. Look, I had to teach dance, right? Because, long story, it was a long story, but I ended up having year 8 boys dance in Barnsley. And it was like, how am I going to do that? We can't get away with just playing Spice Girls and running around. And I got the music to Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings, like the trilogy. I just put some good battle music on and we just choreographed, and I got all the key words across. Was I passionate about it? I like dance, I'm all right with it. I'm no dancer, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's like I was a dance teacher by mistake. But the thing is, I was passionate about those boys should have it because it was on our curriculum. And what we could have done was put them in a room and help them watch a DVD. Do you know what I mean? No one would have really minded with them boys. And I think I was an English teacher, so teaching literature, I'm passionate about that. And I'd have bottom sets because I could get on with bottom set kids for whatever reason. That's what I ended up on my timetable. So I had to teach Seamus Heaney's agricultural poetry about his father, which I'd do my best to do, but I'd have to find the context for it. Now, primary, what I learned in primary and in special is you can't be an expert on everything. Primary teachers, I mean, they've got to know a lot. And what I do with primary teachers now in particular is say, right, you've got your knowledge organizer, perhaps, which has got 10 bullet points about the Romans, but you got to know about the Romans, haven't you? And it don't take long to invest in your own knowledge. And that's when I think teaching can become exciting, because you've got your bullet points. I call that the should curriculum. You should be delivering that because that's the agreement. But then all around it, it's what Christine Council called the hinterland. You've got all that, but that's as important as what's going on in those bullet point lists, if you know what I mean.
And just that it links in. I know Ben's got about 1 million of questions as well. But so whether you are passionate about that subject or whether you are passionate about bringing it to life for somebody else, one of my favourite quotes from Botheredness is this whole thing in regards to pedagogy. Yeah. It's the holding back of nettles on the footpath so children don't get stung.
That's
what
it.
What a way! It's ultimately getting children to understand something, whether you're passionate about it or just passionate about trying to help them as a coach and a mentor or as a guide. That is education and educators to me.
And Steve, and the point with that, and I've extended that metaphor in a way because I've got a lovely slide, when I'm delivering at a conference or something. It just captures it, and I just say as teacher, teacher as Sherpa. The Sherpa takes the climber to the pinnacle. The climber, who perhaps many a time is just a glorified tourist, takes them up to the top, and then steps aside, and allows the climber to view the vista. And I think that's us as teachers. Sometimes we step aside or we work with the children in like a joint productive activity. We're together with them. And I think getting teachers to be pedagogical decision makers, to be discerning about how they're going to deliver content, I think that's something that's been eroded. And some teachers feel like they have no choice about how to deliver something. Whereas if I look across the border to Wales, they have 12 pedagogical principles, which is, so you've already got a buffet, if you like, of how you can deliver content. And I think in England we've been sort of, if you like, kettled like cattle into one way of delivering.
Yeah, and that and for some people, that direct instruction, lead from the front, has been successful, and there's probably a lot of us that live at this side of that modus operandi, which was who have done all right. Now, my question is regularly at that point is that because of or despite of? And I'm not sure. Like, I think about now how I learn, because the irony of being 40 years old and still feeling like I'm learning stuff all the time, because the principle of majority of learning is that you almost arrive somewhere, and once you've got to that point, we're done with you, and we get you to that point, and that's all that really matters to us. As long as we get you to the and to develop that Sherpa analogy, like almost like we've got you there, then it's somebody else's job to take the next bit. And I get that, but it's that almost ability, or almost in the Sherpa, to get the climber to realise the value of the climb and the excitement about their next climb. Yeah. Yes, it's hard work, and we'll help you. And I noticed one of the things that you talked about is about standing beside as opposed to just standing in front of. And I love that. I love that analogy that we don't just need to be in front of the children, but it's about developing that. Interestingly, the way that I've picked up from this is that for all of us, botheredness is a challenge, right? Botheredness as parents, botheredness as teachers, as leaders, as students. Like, there's the whole conversation. It matters, right?
It absolutely does, and it's interesting. The book has got picked. I had some family, obviously it's such a privileged position to be in to produce a book, and so I buy copies for my family or give them away to family and that, and I ended up having to go and do a talk or work with some middle managers in a national bakery. Now, look, between that and the dancing, I keep finding myself in places by mistake. And but what they were interested in was the word. Because when you say botheredness, actually, what are we talking about? And it's interesting that even this morning, someone's just asked me for a 10-point manifesto about botheredness. And I'm like, right, okay, I'll write that this afternoon. I'll just, because I think I know what it is. But it is just placing ourselves into a position. And you talked about passion earlier, Steve, as well. And it's where it's channeling that passion. It's communicating that passion, but also it's bringing in those words that became slightly unfashionable in recent times, like wonder and curiosity and inquiry. I've read recently, I've been, when you see blogs and things, and there's people writing blogs about questioning that could have been written 20 years ago, and I'm all right with that, because that's what happens in education. There's pendulums and stuff, but it's kind of, there's some really good things that we can be doing as teachers that perhaps I worry a little bit that and I mean this with respect to the great teachers that I work with, who perhaps have got 10 years under their belt, but there's still a lot that they've not seen. They've not seen it. They've not seen really good examples of that kind of working alongside, that joint productive activity. I remember reading a book called Working Alongside the Child in the Primary Classroom by Leonard Marsh. And I got it for like 9p off eBay. And it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. And it was a teacher writing passionate, a head teacher in 1970, writing about his passion, which is working with children, talking to children, having proper conversations with children to draw things out of them. And then suddenly, what have we got now? We've got an Oracy Commission, which is great, so we're going to privilege talk. I am all in. And interestingly, I'm really suddenly busy. Because people want to think, oh, we've had all these quiet classrooms. Now we want talking classrooms. Great. I've been busy anyway, because people are fond of my work, I think. And I think there's they can sense my goodwill around it. I'm not trying to tell teachers how to teach. I'm just telling people how I've found things, what I've found out really by travelling around and going into different schools.
It's that beggars thing, isn't it? It's that one beggar telling another beggar where to find food. It's not experts. There's nothing worse than an expert who thinks that they are the expert on something. Do you know what I mean? And call themselves. It's dangerous, right? I really love this. And I was going to go one place, but I feel like I need to go another place now. You've said what you've said. You talk about oracy and conversation, and the art of conversation, and we've talked about this previously, that how difficult it is for people of a certain generation, probably my age and younger, to have a physical conversation for a length of time. Don't like picking up the phone. They'll much rather text on a phone rather than speak to somebody on the phone. I can speak in front of thousands of people, but ask me to ring the local Chinese. I've said this a few times. I hate it. But ultimately, I look at some of the young people that I've worked with, and holding a conversation. And if you go beyond the superficial, give me an answer, I'll move on to the next person. And deep, they struggle, right? So that I welcome this new commission on Oracy as well. I think it's really, really important. But what can we? What do we need to learn about that? About helping young people to speak, right?
I think it. Thanks for that, Ben. I think it goes. For me and my for what it's worth, I just think we miss a trick when we're teaching and we don't find the real world context. Now, you can have a real world context, but it can be an imaginative context. It can be fantastical. So when I've got year ones negotiating with the big bad wolf, we're actually talking about othering, right? So you can have these big themes that sit underneath what we're actually teaching and delivering. We have to place our children into moments, and they can be difficult moments, but they're safe because they're in a story. And the children, I use this phrase, let's say. So it's not let's pretend or let's imagine. You'll remember it from the book. Let's say we need to talk to the wolf because he is not behaving well in the forest. So if we're going to approach him, what are we going to do? What do we need to say to him first? You know, and you couch it in terms like that. And kids are thinking, they're looking up, they're looking down, they're looking at each other. I'll get them talking to each other. I think kids need to be invited in. If we want a conversation, you've got to invite someone in. And if, as you know from the book, using a narrative, using a story context, it's all about, all stories need problems that need solving. All stories ever. And, you know, that's where the conversations can erupt. If I think to last week, I was Charles II being pursued by Oliver Cromwell, and I'm getting hidden at Moseley Old Hall in Wolverhampton, because that's where the school is. And they've got to do a local history study. So that's the story. Now, to get ready for that lesson, I had to do loads of... I'm sitting in Premier Inn night before, proper doing some right research, learning loads of stuff about stuff I didn't know. You know, we talk about knowledge. I didn't know. I found out a load of stuff. And the next day, because the kids have been well taught, you know, and they've been delivered to, and they've been delivered to well, I'm there sitting as Charles. I'm actually sitting there as Charles II saying, I don't know what to do next. And I've got a kid explaining to me. They're in year 2, and he's explaining to me that he knows a tree somewhere that I can go and hide in. And he's bringing his knowledge, but he's telling me, this little boy. And in the feedback afterwards, we do a debrief. Their class teacher was saying, I don't hear him talk like that. It's proper shocked me that he's talked like that. And this is anecdotal, and I know that isn't evidence, but it's just it's giving the space for conversation to happen. And I think in secondary, we shouldn't not be having those conversations. In primary, they work really hard to get kids chatting and talking. I was in early years. They're 4 days in early years, 4 days in. So they're just learning about, they're all knackered because... You know, they've had to put a shift in, these little kids. I'm not talking about the teachers, the kids, but they were practicing contribution. And I think if we can get kids practicing what it's like to contribute through a context, through a story, then actually we might not have older kids and adults rioting. You know, if they learn how to contribute. Sorry, I made a leap there, but you're with me, aren't you? You know what I mean.
Yeah, I think just sitting and listening in regards to early years to secondary or primary to secondary, I was involved in a project, or we were involved in a project with an awarding body that we kind of stepped away from a little bit because their whole thing was, this is we're trying to improve it. We're trying to improve, there was different sections of it, but one of them was transition from primary to secondary. And what they were starting to find early on, or push for early on, was how do we basically create a longer GCSE? And I was like, if that is what the focus is, I thank you very much, but that is definitely not what the evolution and the change in education should be. It should be actually, how does secondary learn from primary and early years and do more of that? Because it seems that we gear them up and get them. Well, I'm not talking about levels and qualification, but knowledge gets to here, and then we have to start again, because I think the year 7 curriculum is actually lower than year 6 in some bits, and I'm just like, why are we doing that? And I think secondary, I don't know. My looking in, I just think we've got too much, and we're trying to cram in and go, we need to prepare them for the exam. So what we're going to do is we're going to ignore and get rid of all of the stuff. We're going to remove the voices because we don't have time for it. And you are going to deliver and give them information that hopefully sticks and they can regurgitate by the time they get to 16. And it saddens me a little bit, because I'm just like, that what you just said, every child should have a voice in a classroom, and it's our job to develop those voices and nurture them out.
You're right, and teachers have got enough on without 3 blokes from north going, right, you need to do more talking. It's got to be weaved in. And do you remember when it was? I remember teaching English, and we'd do loads of speaking and listening projects. It was great. You know, we'd do Desert Island Discs. We'd do everything where kids would play, like, so they could use up more time. They'd play I'd Do Anything for Love by Meatloaf, telling me that it was their favourite song. you know. But we used to do a lot of projects like that, and I do think, going to your point, Steve, about year 7, I think we should look at it more as a transition year. And I mean, what's the point of year 8? If someone can tell me what year 8's for, I'm all right. But no one can tell me. They'll go, "Oh, it's just getting ready for year 9, is it?" Yeah, it's like, what are we doing?
But
And
what's year 9 then? Is year 9 not
yeah,
getting ready?
Well, year 9's getting ready to frighten them for
Yeah, but
GCSE.
is year 9 not just getting ready for year 10, and then is year 10 not just getting ready for actually their aim point exam? And then is it all just in preparation
absolutely.
for it?
What we did in Barnsley, and I skirted over this earlier, but what we did, we had a great head teacher, Matthew Milburn, absolutely brilliant head teacher. He came in and went, "What we're doing in year 7, let's get projects going." So we did projects. Now other people can label up what we did. They'll go, "Oh, it's project-based learning," or it's Now, what we were doing was thinking, we need our kids to be up and doing. We need them up and doing. Let's go back to Jerome Bruner. Let's get them up and acting. Let's do that. So that's what we were doing. We were getting kids making British museums in the classrooms and stuff like that. It felt like a really good extension of year 6. And that was the intention. They had the same teacher across a few subjects. So I taught English, drama, obviously. I taught a bit of music. We played to our strengths. I couldn't teach. I did a bit of science. I couldn't do maths, so they went to maths. But I had my same class for in secondary. It was an unusual model. I had them over a few hours. I'd have them for a morning, 3 mornings a week, and we really felt like we'd done something different and really innovative. And it was a long game. But when we played the long game, their results were better because I think partially because they'd had a good experience in Key Stage 3. When I work with secondaries now, and I'll go and do a soul destroying for everybody, Twilight in a secondary, and some teachers will be like, "Right, I'm really keen on this. I'm really interested." Other teachers, I imagine, are just thinking, "Well, I've got too much on and our curriculum's sorted." What we're often not thinking about is what it's like for the child. And I think, that where people are now looking at year 7, and they need to, because get ready, some secondary schools don't know what's coming. And these kids are different since COVID. I'm speaking very broadly, and I'm just really saying what I'm getting told as well. But they're different, as in they've had a different experience. They've had a trauma, and their parents have had a trauma as well. And we can't just put them in boxes in year 7. It's got to be different.
I totally agree, and it's refreshing actually listening to it, because as an RE teacher, I was an RE and sociology teacher, and when you've got dry topics, like Steve was a PE teacher, there's only the kids that who can't run the 8 PE, right? Most people, a good chunk of them, unless it's freezing, you've got to do cross country or country dancing. To be fair, and taught in FE, so they chose to do it. I had RE Tuesday afternoon, year 8, bottom set. You're similar to Prince. Who they didn't want to learn about the 5Ks of Sikhism or the different pilgrimages that different Catholics go on. And principally, there's layers here, isn't there? So I had to try and make it interesting. I had to give a shit about it. I think botheredness is a polite way of saying giving a shit, right?
Yeah.
I had to give a shit about it, and then try and make it interesting for them. But I had to connect it to something that made a relevance into their world. And then ultimately, though, the teacher can do as much as they can. The school can give them the freedom to have that flexibility and manage risk taking and stuff. But actually, this is a curriculum conversation that says these people need to have done this by this age. And as I've said before, we've talked about this on the podcast. We've done it in our trends booklet and whatever else about the ivory towers, right? That people in a far off land somewhere in Whitehall that are making a decision about what is appropriate per age, and almost that they have to learn by age, and they've got to learn this stuff by that point. And I don't profess to be a pedagogical expert, a curriculum, a learning. But what I do understand is that there's a whole heap of shit in the curriculum that we don't need to do. And why do we do it?
I think there's you're spot on, and I think there's a culture of fear, though. From those, those people. I was hoping that things would be dramatically altered as the government changed, but I'm not sure. Change can't happen quickly, or quick enough. I think that it's just, it could be really depressing. But what we can do, I mean, I see myself as some sort of medieval nomadic war machine, trundling from place to place, spreading like you do, spreading positive messages, saying that it doesn't have to be like this. And I do a lot with independent thinking with Ian Gilbert, and he talks about, he coined this lovely phrase years ago. He just said, "There's always another way." But the way we're bringing our teachers up now is saying there is just this way. It's almost like with the Mandalorian, this is the way. Whereas we know there's lots of ways. And what we have to do is encourage our teachers, or find spaces now, or encourage conversations about, how do we want to do this at this school? Because this school is like this. This is our catchment area. This is our community. We love the community we've got. How can we build a curriculum for them that is going to, equip the children for the future? I mean, I love that. What Wales have are 4 pedagogical principles, and one of them is the curriculum has got to make, it's all ethical citizens of the world who are proud of Wales but are looking out. I've paraphrased that. It's something like that. It's basically, man, that is just brilliant. You're proud of where you're from, but you want to see the world, and you're gonna do well with it. You're gonna be ethical. I mean, that's a government's ambition, not what I feel like we have. I zone out, I'll be honest. I'm not very good at engaging with, this is the latest thing that we've got to do in this is what the latest government thing. I zone out. I'm thinking, well, what does that mean to little Ashley in Hare Hills, who's got to learn about the Fire of London? What's that mean to her? What's the Fire of London mean to her? And how do we protect her into that? Which I think, I can't remember if I write about that in the book now, but it's a story I tell where, these kids, they just want to do they're ready to learn, but what is it we're teaching them?
And do you think that, I think it's chapter 7, finding humanity? I think, does that relate to that ultimately knowledge, in terms of all the different things that you've talked about, Fire London, all that kind of stuff, the stuff that Ben's talked about, my knowledge content delivery was never rich. A knowledge-rich curriculum in PE. I don't even know what knowledge-rich curriculum actually means. I think it's more knowledge-based than the previous knowledge-based curriculum that existed and just putting a stamp on it. But anyways, that whole thing of finding humanity, but ultimately the knowledge, bringing it to life, but also we've talked about a lot recently, and it's been in a feature of our trends for quite a while now in regards to the skills and development and the understanding around it. That compassion, that creativity. You mentioned Sir Ken Robinson. I think you referenced him in the book in regards to some of his great quotes. That ultimately the importance of creativity, and that as a stimulus for innovation and thinking beyond just the creative subjects. Do you think that's one of the key bits of education that we're missing in regards to botheredness about each individual student's context, the environment that they're in, the location, and then applying it to just how they can learn based on their experience? And
I think so. There's a lot there, Steve, but I think there's for me, all the teachers I meet are really wanting to do a good job, and they're wanting to do the right thing, and they do care about the kids that they have in their rooms. If you're a secondary teacher, you could have 180 kids passing through your room in that day. If you're a primary teacher, you're often in comms with the families, because you see them at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. If you're in a special setting, you've got a lot of background about each child, so you kind of know them. And maybe particularly in an SEMH setting, you're kind of finding the bridges to build with that child, even though that child might want to smash them up. I think the word compassion is really important in this conversation. That's what I mean by finding humanity. It's I don't know if you remember the chapter around coastal erosion and the rock cycle, and there's an old man in a house, and you know, I can retell that story, and that, to be honest, I do that with colleagues. I'll do the actual lesson with them on a bit of training. But one of the key messages from that is it might be quite a dry area of curriculum, literally, and but it's emotionally fueled, and that's when we can get into the neuroscience, if you like, around emotional learning, of which I'm not academically informed about. I just know that it must be true because I've got the evidence of my own eyes and my own experience. I think compassion is key. I think what we need is schools, and it's no one particular to blame, but a school needs to have a curriculum that's not just, if you like, demonstrating compassion, but it's actually being compassionate to the kids and, really importantly, to the teachers. So it's a curriculum that's kind to the people delivering it. I've used the word delivery, but you know what I mean. It's there. It's there for those people. So compassion, empathy, all those things that people have splattered on their vision statements and in big, really nice letters on the walls in the hall. It's how do we live that? How do we live that?
And to take it on a little side note, but I think it's absolutely related as well, is that the best book of all time, like this is a big statement, right? In my opinion, was and is To Kill a Mockingbird. So when I see you mention that 100 times in the book, like I'm buzzing, right? And do you know why I think To Kill a Mockingbird is the greatest book of all time? I think what happened was Mr. Thurkel, year 9 English, was just brought it to life. And genuinely, I don't mean that like cheesily, but I remember being upstairs. I know exactly what room I was in. I knew exactly how it made me feel. And it wasn't just like the clips of the film with Gregory Peck. It wasn't just them. It wasn't the fact that I literally would go home and read that book. Now that I wanted to be a cool kid, right? I didn't want to be known for loving English books. But the reason why it landed for me was because it reflected, and I started making me think about my own beliefs and bias and my own ideas around the treatment of others and how do I know what's true and what's not true. Like there's so much packed into that you can pull out of a book. And I think that about like the coming back to the RE stuff that I was talking about. Like there's so much that's impacting that. The reason why would a billion people travel to Saudi Arabia every year? Why would they do that? Walk through the desert. Like, at what level of commitment and what level of belief must they have to and like, what can we connect into that and that element? So I loved that came in there, but it feels like there's that level of, you talked about the story and you've mentioned that before, but you mentioned also about like that idea about like context and about understanding how we need to bring context into what happens. That helps bring the botheredness. It's like that connection, isn't it? From this is an abstract idea of Atticus Finch and To Kill a Mockingbird, but how do I make that relevant to a kid in Accrington or a kid in Barnsley? That's it. It's about bridging that bridge of botheredness that you talk about in the book, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, most kids will engage, but it's actually moving them to a level of engagement's great, brilliant. It may be just meeting our expectations around manners, it's great. What we want is investment, and some kids will naturally invest anyway because they love you as their teacher or they love your subject. We were talking about PE earlier with drama, and I was an accidental drama teacher. I'd not had any real training in that, but they wanted to set up a drama department, and I said I'd do it. But the first 10 kids in the row, year 9, queuing up, they'd all be buzzing because they'd all be like Glee Club. They'd be coming running in, pirouetting. And then the middle 15 kids, or the middle 20 kids, they were just turning up because it was drama and it was on their timetable. So they're going to engage. And then there was the back end, the kids at the back who were worried about humiliation, embarrassment, making fools of themselves in front of their peers. So they'd be the ones who would be my behaviour management kids, if you like. My thought is, and I'm thinking back now to that idea of the nettles, is I wanted all the kids to really be buzzing about drama because that was my subject. And if you like, in my planning, that was reflected. So I would plan for Jonathan, who was a pain, but I'd plan for him because I know he's a pain. For the two girls who just want to put makeup on, as in, so they were getting ready for lunchtime. How do I get them bothered about it? And it's hard won, that, but finding a context, finding something to hang on to is key. And going back to the coastal erosion thing, when we teach geography, find the people. If we find people, suddenly it matters. And that's finding the humanity. And it's not easily done, and it's not a quick fix. It's something that it requires a teacher to think and imagine. And professional imagination is something that has taken the biggest hit, I think, over the last 10, 15 years. We should be able, as teachers, to be able to walk into a blank room with 30 children and be able to do an hour without freaking out. I saw a note on a whiteboard in a school I was in just a few weeks ago, just in the first week of term, and it said, sorry, I couldn't finish the lesson. It was a cover teacher or someone who, it might not have been a cover teacher, actually, because they signed it Julie or something. It said, sorry, I couldn't finish this lesson, but the tech failed. And I thought, well, so what? You should have something on you. You should be able to be agile enough. And it's not the teacher's fault that they're not. It's just that's it now. We're at this. The genie's out of the bottle. We're in this position now where people would be frightened. Sorry, I've gone off on one. Are you still there?
We're still here. Don't worry. Don't worry. We're listening intently.
Sorry.
So for this season, we've for this year actually. 2024, we've always asked free quickfire questions. We mix them up every now and again. So, because some people listen to the podcast and started to research what their response was, I was like, no, that's just completely defeats the object of it. So, I'll start, then Ben will come in, and then I'll go last. But quickfire for you.
Quick.
You have, yes. If you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
I'd change the where we've got to in initial teacher training. That's it.
Ben, you muted.
Thanks, Steve. I won't mute myself then. That was a great answer. And I started waffling on about how good it was. That's the reason why. What's the most exciting educational trend that you see emerging?
It's got to be the fact that suddenly we've got to get the kids talking. And I know Oracy is much more than that. I do know that. But as a start, wonderful. Listening, speaking, gesture, body language, all these things, wonderful.
Who's your biggest inspiration in education?
Oh man. I've got many, and to single one out would be unfair. But there's just so many people who've been generous to me in my work, and I would say that amongst all the brilliant people I've worked with, I've had some great times with Professor Mick Waters. But I could name another 10 now.
Now, you're not the first person or the last person, I imagine, that will say Mick. And we're very much looking forward to being with him very, very soon.
Yeah.
It's been, I think probably there'll be other people that will be saying Hywel Roberts in answer to that question because of the way that you care about education, care about teachers, care about young people, want this to be a place that is David Cameron, the real David Cameron, came on the other day. And
I love that man.
Yeah, wonderful human being. And he said about making schools a place that children want to be at. That it's just like
simple.
It's simple, right?
It shouldn't be hard, that, should it?
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. And I think what you're doing, this new book, if for those people who haven't seen, we'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Oh, thanks.
There it is. We both got it, and we both read it, and it's
so much.
It's landed that, and it lands. And for those people who are thinking about where education can go and what education could be like, I think they could do a lot wrong by not reading that. So it's a phenomenal book. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for putting your. We haven't even gone into the stories about films and books and all the stuff in it. I was howling laughing at part of it. Howling. Do you see what I did then?
I know what you did there, young man. Yeah. I'd love to come back if you'd have me, and we could pick it up.
Absolutely, it'd be wonderful. Thanks, Hywel, for your time. And for those people who haven't already got their tickets for Uprising 2025, we are well in front. June 2025, come and join us, and we're going to get the band back together and have some fun as a Wolfpack community. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.